Back together again. It's Ted and I. We're talking NFL football. We're talking NFL football draft. Yes, we're moving past 2022.
Finally.
We're going to 2023. Ted, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Breaking news. My buddy Aaron Rodgers, you see him right there on the cover of my book. You could take the Packers uniform off. He's wearing a different green in New York. How about that for timing, everybody?
Yeah, that's excellent timing. I suppose that's where we'll start. We're going to get into a variety of topics today, talking positions, talking betting strategies, talking the differences between this year and last year, and doing something I haven't done yet in the podcast that I've been doing. It's talking about current disgruntled players and possible landing spots and how that affects the draft. But first, it's Aaron Rodgers talk. Ted, you've got the details of the trade. For those who don't know the details of the trade, pass it on.
Yeah, and it's a little strange just to think about it, but because there are conditional issues here, you know, how much he plays next year and all that. But the Jets get Rodgers, number 15 pick in this draft coming up, and a 5th round pick, and the Packers get number 13. So they swap choices, and you'll talk about how that might affect some prop plays out there in just a second. And Packers also get the 6th round pick and a conditional. The 2nd round pick next year could be a 1st round pick if Rodgers plays 65% of the plays. Now, that puts some giant question marks over the deal, because that has nothing to do whether he plays next season, the following season. If he says, you know what, 1 year's enough, I'm out of here, then the Jets are totally screwed. That's a really bad deal for them. If he plays 60%, let's put it this way, he's going to play at 65% unless he gets hurt. He's going to play 99% unless he gets hurt. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how that affects the Jets in the long run. But they put themselves in a corner here when they said we're making this deal basically whatever it takes. And now it's whatever it takes.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation, but I think it's fueled by the fact that Matthew Stafford changed jobs, changed locations, and won a Super Bowl, and Tom Brady changed locations and won the Super Bowl. The difference is those two teams reside in the NFC. They don't reside in the AFC, where Josh Allen has played twice a year, Tua has played twice a year, Justin Herbert is in the division, Joe Burrow is in the division. Some guy named Pat Mahomes is in the division. I mean, there's a lot of steps to overcome. And the Jets have
in the conference, by the way. Say conference, not the division.
Conference, I should say conference, correct. And we also come to the fact we haven't even talked about New England, who has beaten the Jets 13 times in a row. Pittsburgh's improving. Deshaun Watson's there for a full off season. Baltimore may have Lamar Jackson. I don't get it, because if he plays only 1 year and he plays 65% of the snaps, the Jets will not have a 1st round pick in 2024. And that scares me beyond comprehension, I should say.
But the Jets they're all in on a quarterback situation, because they know that is what cost them last season and not making the playoffs. So they're willing to go and say, okay, hopefully he's happy here. He's healthy for whatever amount of time, for at least 2 years, I think is what they're guessing, at least. And then, if they make the playoffs 2 years in a row, they can still maybe draft a quarterback somewhere if they have to. But if not, they're screwed, because they don't really have a good backup right now for the long haul either. So good luck.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the dividing line. If he plays 2 years, you can say, okay, we're willing to do this because it's Aaron Rodgers and he still plays at a very, very high level. But examining further now with the Jets this year, remember last year, the Jets had my number 1 draft haul, and they had legitimately some unbelievable talent that they added last year. What a great year for the New York Jets in terms of building the franchise back up. And this year they have 5 total picks now. They went from 6 to 5. So this is a steeper climb now. And the implications of going from pick 13 to pick 15 may cost them one of the offensive linemen they were looking at, but in the short run. But Actually, I don't think it changes much. I still think they go offensive line, and I think they have two people in mind instead of one. There's a really good right tackle available that was rated just below Broderick Jones, who is mostly tied to the Jets. The only difference here is instead of having a pair of second-round picks, they just have one second-round pick. So if I'm the Jets, I'm looking to move back a little bit. I don't think 5 picks is enough.
How about intangible here, where potentially it could be a new destination for a free agent that might be interested in going there as opposed to not at all before?
That's a good point. There could be talk. Maybe you talk DeAndre Hopkins, for example. I hadn't thought about that, but he's one of the players I was going to bring up later. Might as well introduce him in here now. He will cost the team a second-round pick. That's what I think it'll come down to, and maybe a swap somewhere else. But bottom line is, if the Jets want to get completely out of the second round, they could add Rodgers and Hopkins and be completely out of the second round in this draft. And it's not necessarily a bad idea, but again, it's short-term thinking. But that's probably the going rate for Hopkins. Somewhere in the top 40 is what Arizona would want.
Well, it just opens the window to that kind of a deal. And again, if you get 2 quality years out of these guys, you're probably doing okay, because you don't know, with a draft pick, you don't know if you're going to get 1 quality year out of them or you're going to get a career, and especially, second or third rounder. So it's the gamble that you take if you're New York Jets, who you're always the other team on the East Coast anyway, and you might as well give it a shot.
Now, let's look from the Green Bay perspective. Now, first of all, you and I had this conversation about 3 years ago when Jordan Love was drafted, how unready he was for the NFL. I don't feel that way anymore. He got to look at the work habits of Aaron Rodgers. He got to clean up some of his mechanics, I'm sure, over 3 years. There were parts of his game that were NFL ready. There were lots of parts that would have been draft bust. And now he gets the chance to start, and it's his team. That's the first take. The second take is Green Bay had I'd say a slightly above average draft last year in a great draft class, but the previous 2 years, not so much. Now we thought they were sitting pretty with 10 or 11 picks. Now they have 11 or 12 picks in this draft. This is a chance to move right back up in a division where Detroit has some internal, external, issues going on, and they haven't proven to be a playoff team yet. They certainly are on the upgrade, and they have 2 of the first 18 picks. So we expect a lot out of Detroit. We expect Chicago to improve, but there's nowhere to go but up. And Minnesota is kind of at the crossroads. So Green Bay can reestablish themselves with this draft. It'll be interesting to see what they do with so much draft capital.
I think one thing that most people do not talk about at all is you hear, okay, hey, it's just like when Brett Favre retired, or they finally eventually retired 15 times and then traded him to the Jets, right? And you had Rodgers under him for 3 years, same as Jordan Love, same amount of time learning from the Hall of Famer. And there's stuff in Love's game that, from what I understand, he has picked up a lot of what Rodgers did in games and in practice that he never would have picked up if he didn't play for the Packers and just watch for 3 years. And as Aaron told me, I don't know, 12 years ago, whatever it was, he said, the luckiest thing for me was getting to watch Brett Favre and learn under him for as long as I did, as badly as I wanted to play from day one. And I think Jordan Love, he's in a little different spot coming out of college with probably a little less experience, right? From the amount of throws he made, although Aaron wasn't there forever either.
Yeah.
Right?
Actually, Love had a tremendous amount of throws because it was a passing offense, and he had 2 years of starting experience.
Oh, was it two full years? 2 full years with a lot of,
I believe.
Okay, I thought it was just 1 year with a lot of throws, but you know more than I do.
I believe it was 2.
Okay,
and it was a pass-happy offense. And he was gunslinging there. I mean,
right.
There wasn't any rhyme and reason going on. And the limited action that I saw him last year, and the limited interaction I've had with people who are close to the Green Bay, have their ear to Green Bay, is that he was reading defenses better. And
Right.
that's what you expect out of every quarterback,
Of course.
having been in the system for 3 years. But this is a real positive sign for Jordan Love. Whatever happens, Green Bay needs to surround him. They need to replenish along the offensive line. They so badly need a tight end, which I'm certain they're going to go after in the first or second round. Now with extra second round capital, they have a chance to move up for a tight end. And tight ends, this is a very, very strong tight end draft. And if they want to ever get off the field, of course, they're going to have to improve their ability to stop the run and to get after the quarterback. Injuries along the defensive line, they had no answers for that last year. And this is the year that they could really add a lot of team depth. I just hope they focus on the right positions, because Green Bay may not be going away as fast as people think.
Yeah, and by the key common denominator, that the word you used was gunslinger. Okay, Favre, Rodgers, and now Love throwing. The way he's thrown the short passes, again, small sample size, but what I've seen, there's a similar motion to Rodgers. The way he's throwing the ball on the run, the little quick stuff, it looks just like Aaron in many ways. Now, of course, he's a long way from being him for the long haul, but. I think there's some positive notes there, but just there's so much to be determined.
Yeah, a lot to be determined. So as we start to dig into this draft, we come off a draft that was the deepest ever. I had somewhere close to 280 rated players, people that were draft eligible with numerical grades and what I call star grades of people that are 5th, 6th, 7th rounders. And 200, I would say in a 256 to 259 player draft, the average number of people I would have rated would be around 240. So having 280 was an astronomical number, but we knew why, because the stars didn't come out because of COVID. Everybody got an extra year of college. It was just a really, really strong draft. It was hard to miss in last year's draft. But now, even with some more people having 5th and 6th years, it's my contention that the best players came out last year when they could. And now we're still going to have a lot of people eligible for the draft that are played 5 years of college, 6 years of college, counting a red shirt or a COVID year. But these are the players that needed that year to even have a chance to get in the NFL. So what do we have? I think we're going to have 24 players on my board that have first round grades, and people I trust have fewer than that. So it's not a top heavy draft, and it's not as deep a draft. We're back to about 235, 240 eligible players with draft grades.
Yeah, it may not be as deep a draft, but again, individual positions is what we're going to get into now. I think that really be a good idea to say, look, there's strength in tight end, there's strength in corner and running back, but not some of the positions the same as last year. And that's going to make a difference. And now it's where you draft and are you smart enough to pick up the right guy?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we have different positions that should be targeted this year than previous years. Wide receiver, for example, just a bad year for wide receivers, and you're getting buyer beware on all of them. And wide receivers are developed really quickly now in college and even in high school. So you're going to have a lot of hit rate for the 3rd, 4th, 5th round wide receivers, but you're going to need developmental time. And we've been spoiled by the last 2, 3, 4 years of wide receivers. It's been incredible. Last year, this is something you and I talked mostly offline, but maybe in one show. The teams that did the best in the NFL draft also did the best in terms of season win totals. Seattle killed the draft. They surprised most everybody. The Jets, the Giants really had one of their finest drafts in a decade. They went to the playoffs. The Jets almost went to the playoffs, exceeded their win totals. The Ravens had a very deep draft, and even though they didn't meet expectations by their standards, they did go over their win total. Conversely, it was hard to fail in the draft, but New England failed in the draft. The Raiders bombed completely in the draft, and these teams did not make the playoffs. did not make their season win total. It was an interesting correlation because in general, you're going to have a low positive correlation between the draft because it's really not all these guys really start. It's very unusual that the Jets have 4 all-pro guys from the rookie draft, or Seattle starts 6 guys. Usually you only have 1 or 2 guys that are starting. But I don't think it carries over to this draft, and want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the strengths of the last draft was just the fact that there were so many good players available at so many positions. You could probably do well if you didn't screw it up. You already mentioned the Raiders and the Patriots didn't do their job correctly. But this draft, you have to be more focused, I think, on, okay, if we need a running back, we can get him. Now, when do we get him? You know, we mentioned something off air yesterday a little bit about you don't want to get a running back too soon, but there's really one guy who stands out, which we'll get to in a second. And then the rest are sort of, I guess you could juggle them, and whichever one you put in, you're going to be fine. And I think it goes by position. And your need. So when you get that guy, when are you going to pick your need and get it out of the way immediately, as opposed to hoping that there's depth in that position, and later you'll get a guy that maybe he'll be the right guy. And that's always my concern with some of these GMs that I know in the past, we love to have parties afterwards saying, can't believe that guy still has a job.
Well, I love the comedy. I'll be writing about the draft for the 43rd
sure
time. And I appreciate teams like Atlanta and Houston who do whatever they do and has us shaking our heads. One thing you mentioned right away, and I think this is a point that needs to be drilled into people who are watching the draft, who are drafting, who are looking at betting the draft and so on. Focus. It's going to be so much harder this year because of the talent. Somebody's 35th overall pick on their draft board in one of these draft rooms is going to be somebody else's 15th pick or 55th pick. You've got to stay focused. If some of the offensive linemen come off, you've got to know, do I back off on offensive line and go to another position, or do I go right in? If there's only one safety or one running back worthy of being drafted in the early picks, for safety, in fact, there's only one safety on my board in the top 60.
Wow.
You know, once that safety is gone, you've got to pivot, or you've got to get a cornerback who can eventually slide over and be multidimensional in terms of what he does. Do you wait on tight end because there's so many good ones, 7 in my top 100? Maybe you do that and you get another position where it's thin. The focus for these GMs, because you don't have as much time as you used to. In round 2, you get 7 minutes. That's all you get, and you've got to react. And then there's going to be a trade that's going to be happening in the middle of the countdown clock that's on board. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the GMs that are focused are going to do a better job of that.
7 minutes is not enough. If I'm in Kansas City getting ready, I'm probably eating some barbecue ribs while I'm watching this. So it's like, hey, wait, I got to wipe my mouth off. I only got 2 minutes left. Look, what I love about the draft this year is that we're going to see some of the newer GMs, what they're truly all about. They're first and second year guys. I mean, this is their chance to shine or show us, you know what, they're in over their heads. And I know you have a few names probably at the tip of your tongue you can already want to throw back at us. But I really believe that this is going to be a giant test for some of these guys to say, are we on the right track, or am I just another guy who just picked somebody who might be a starter, or as you say in the past, he wasn't on your list and he'll be working at 7-Eleven soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you bring up a good point there, because we've got new GMs in Tennessee pick 11, and Houston has a new, I guess it's not a shared operation anymore. They dumped one of the guys, but
right.
They're picking at 12, they're picking at 2, and so on. Arizona has a new GM. They're picking at 3. These guys aren't used to fielding 17 different trade opportunities. And are they going to be lowballed? What's the right trade to make? How far back should they trade? How far up should they go? And you know something, Ted, the uncertainty of this draft as opposed to the last 5 or 6 is because we have half the league with new coach, with either first or second-year coaches. We have a quarter of the league with new GMs or somebody taking over was in the room as an assistant or something like that. But that's not only is that an enormous amount of change, but most of this change takes place at the top of the draft. So how do you know for sure what you don't have a track record on these GMs, and yet we're predicting what the first 10, 11, 12 picks are with guys who have never done this before?
Yeah, and one of my biggest concerns with those kinds of guys, even second-year GMs, okay? I mean, it's not like they've been around forever and they really know the ins and outs of not only picking or when to make a trade. I think desperation comes into play way too often. They pick the wrong guy at the wrong time, only because, you know what, we're so desperate. We got to do this, we got to do that. And often, best player available is good for you. And sometimes it's not good for you because you need a position so badly. If you're not used to doing this, there's a good chance you're going to screw up.
Yeah. And you know my mantra, if you've got a young quarterback, and it seems like there's a lot of them in the league right now, if you want that guy still breathing at the end of the season or at the end of 2 or 3 seasons, you better go get that offensive lineman to protect their blind side or any side of them, the center calling the signals. And you better get that tight end who has a larger catch radius, because you're going to throw into tighter windows than you did in the NCAA. And your timing is going to be a tick slow for the first 2 or 3 years. The sack ratios of teams like the Bears, 3-to-1 sacks, what were they, like 60-something sacks they allowed, 20-something they had. I mean, you can't live on those sack ratios, and the new GMs have to be aware of this, especially if they have young quarterbacks.
There's only one quarterback in my mind that somehow survives all of that, and that's Joe Burrow. The rest of them are like, they're dead meat. You're not gonna get your win total. You're not gonna make the playoffs, and you ain't going nowhere. So you better figure out the O-line. And you know what? You had a better chance last year, and if you didn't do it last year, now it's going to be a little tougher this year. Is that correct on the O-line?
Oh yeah, it's going to be a little tougher. And if you're talking Cincy specifically, you didn't do enough in last year's draft when there were so many great players. I know you did a lot in free agency, but you thought that was it. And I think they should have gone a little heavier. And now in the draft, you're still sitting late in the draft, and you don't know what the draft board is going to look like by the time you pick. It's not. You're probably going to end up with a day 2 offensive lineman instead. So one way you can fix that is by getting a running back. I know running backs aren't sexy in the first round, but if you're trying to protect your quarterback, if you're trying to beat Tampa and not throw the ball 700 times like Tom Brady had to do last year, if you want to be a little bit more unpredictable, maybe it is time to get a running back so you balance your run pass percentages a little bit.
Right. The other thing is that the timing of the O-line, for example, like with Cincinnati, they didn't do the draft as much as they did free agents, and I believe one was in a trade, if I remember correctly. But I think, would they pick up like 3 free agent O-linemen last year?
They picked up 3. And, that's nice because they get to assimilate. We knew, just like with Kansas City the year before, it wasn't going to gel right away. But when it did, it was powerful.
Right.
The biggest problem I have, though, with Cincinnati right now is 2 of their guys were hurt before the title game last year. And, they could have actually gone to back-to-back Super Bowls, which is
absolutely
quite amazing for Cincinnati, with everything that the franchise has gone through. Credit to them for being a sound drafting organization. But now they got at least one of those guys, as I hear, won't even be ready for the start of the season. The timetable is just not there. So, hate to see that. Injuries are such a part of the game. That's why you can never have enough. Back to your point about best player available, that's what you have to do because you don't know where injuries will strike.
Right. But with Cincinnati, depending on who's available and when, I'd still like to pick up one more O-lineman in the draft. I don't want to go into. I don't want to go into this season thinking, okay, well, if this guy gets hurt, we're already dead. You got to have somebody in there for the long haul, and bring in a kid. Yeah.
Now we're going to talk draft, but I want to leave you with one more free agency nugget. I said this offline to you, and a lot of teams spend mucho money in free agency. it's kind of been a trend lately that the team that spends the most money in free agency does improve. Jacksonville, we all know what happened with Urban Meyer, but they spent a ton of money to get Christian Kirk and Marvin Jones and Ingram in there and a couple of defensive players, and they all were better than what they had, and it contributed to Jacksonville not only exceeding their win total, but playing stride for stride with Kansas City in the playoffs, and they have a bright future because of that. So I pose to you, I won't make it long-winded, but give me two teams that you think might have been spent the most money in free agency this year.
You talk about this past season.
This past year, who's the leader in the clubhouse that's spending boatloads of money for free agency?
Okay, we talked about this yesterday, and I'm still in my hockey mind. Isn't Miami up there though somewhat because of their receiver?
Well, Tyreek Hill was the year before.
Oh, that's true. You're talking about this. Yeah, you got it.
Just this year. Now, I'll just give it to you, and I'll give it to all those listening. It's the Denver Broncos.
Yes.
The Denver Broncos spent the most money this year, and that doesn't even include what money they spent to get their coach.
That's true.
Sean Payton and so on. So they've upgraded.
Which we don't know the number yet on, and we may never know, but I guarantee you that's a huge reason he's there.
Cost him a draft pick, though.
It cost him a draft pick, but the owners have so much money, they could buy draft picks in their minds. Yeah. So,
But you can't buy titles with money. You can ask a few owners and soon to be deposed owners of that. But I like the trajectory. They disappointed last year. They got somebody who's going to make it much more quarterback friendly for Russell Wilson. They generally do okay in the draft. They're not going to have a lot of draft capital. They're going to get their running back back. The only thing I would worry about would be their defensive coordinator position, which I wasn't too crazy about. But we could see an uptick for Denver in the upcoming year. That's just a little bit of nugget there.
Yeah, but it's so much revolves around Russell Wilson because of the fact that, everybody, for the most part, feels he didn't drop off that much in one season. It was a bad timing thing. He's got to have a better attitude. From what I understand, he's already, got his head into the video and getting ready for this season really early. And I think this new coach grabbed him by the lapels and say, "Let's go, baby," from the start. And there's no slacking off this year. So that's going to be fascinating to see.
I agree. So let's get into the draft. What position or what teams or what players, what fascinates you? Where you want to start?
Well, let's get the quarterbacks out of the way, okay? Because everybody wants to talk quarterbacks. I'm more curious. I forget what I know because you're the draft expert and the college expert. I want to know your total thoughts to the second. CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, what do you think is reality here? You're hearing this guy is dropping again. It's all talk and then Will Levis has moved up in Vegas as the second pick favorite among quarterbacks. What do you feel about where do you stand on this right now as we're just a few days away?
Well, bottom line is Young is going first. And the reason he's going first is a combination of the way the game is being played today and his separation in terms of his anticipation in the pocket, how the game has already slowed down for him. So he's a legit talent. He has enough arm strength. He just doesn't have the height, but the game is different right now.
I was going to say, if it was 3 years ago, and the same draft pick, would he go first? Or 4 years ago, would they say, you know what, can't deal with the height thing?
Stroud would go first for two reasons. Number one, there was no such thing as an S2 score where they're measuring spatial ability and whatever. And, Stroud reportedly didn't do so well on that. So we wouldn't have that information and we wouldn't have enough information. Kyler Murray kind of broke the mode that, he's going to go one because he would fit in the Kingsbury offense. And to some extent that did work out. He did fit in that offense. But he's more of a improvisational schoolyard. Let's draw it up in the sand, run around. If you remember that last second touchdown where he ran around for 20 seconds, that's Kyler Murray. That's not Bryce Young. Bryce Young is a completely different quarterback.
That was
Where
the
I am
Kyler.
on Will,
That was the Kyler Murray who got hurt on that play, if I remember too. Is that correct? Is that
I
where he?
don't know if he
Isn't
got
that
hurt.
is that where
He
he hurt
got
his
hit at the
ankle?
end.
I thought that's where
No,
he hurt
that
his.
was a year before.
Oh,
It
that
was
was the
even
pre.
year before take
Okay,
that, it was just an incredible play. It was a
right,
schoolyard play. It's the kind
right,
of play that he makes and it works in Kingsbury's offense. But Bryce
right.
Young is more play to play. He's going to get it. Give him 2 plays in the huddle. He can choose between the two. And that's a rare attribute for a rookie.
Yeah.
Will Levis hype is real because that's what Houston does. That's what I've said before and so on. My problem with Will Levis is quarterbacks that are drafted number 2 and number 3 have a 70% bust rate over the last 30 years. And Will Levis fits in that mold more than anything. I don't know
Isn't
if
he
Stroud's going to make it, but I
right
don't think Levis is going to make it.
now? Isn't Levis sort of the new version of Jay Cutler?
I didn't have him in mind as far as a quarterback comparison. Levis has a cannon of an arm. I guess Cutler had a very strong arm too. Both throw interceptions, so I can see that.
Yeah.
Both are willing to take risks throwing into tight windows.
How about decision making similar to Jay Cutler and
I think
mistake?
Levis is super smart. I just think
Okay.
he trusts his ability beyond what he should trust. And I also think he's going to get into trouble, especially if he's on Houston, because they have an incomplete team.
By the way, that's a different part of the brain, the medulla oblongata, and whatever that decision making. I know a lot of smart people who make really stupid
Yeah.
decisions in life. And the other thing is,
Yeah.
Levis is mistake prone. And how does
Yeah.
that fit? He's got to get that out of his system in the pros, or he's got no chance.
You can teach some of that out of him. The other thing is internal clock. He took way too many sacks with Kentucky. And I know people will say they changed offensive coordinators and the team was worse, but you can't use that as an excuse. Kentucky scored relatively low number of points per game in today's NFL. They won in today's NCAA. They won defensively. And I don't care if you were reloading. It's Kentucky, and they've gone to 4 or 5 or 6 even bowl games in a row. Stoops has really built the program up where they get some quality recruits, and it is the SEC. They're going to get quality recruits. I expected more of Levis, and I thought that they were calling the game to rely on their defense more than their offense because they saw Levis struggling behind that offensive line.
So are you saying if not for Houston, Will Levis would still be down the list, whatever amount?
I think because Indy is desperate for a quarterback because they've rented a quarterback ever since Andrew Luck retired.
Of course.
You have these teams that it's not necessarily fan influence, but like you were saying before, they feel the need, they feel pressure to get it right.
They're desperate.
And you want to build a quarterback from day one. And I don't fault Indy for stopping this revolving door of Carson Wentz and Matt Ryan and Jacoby Brissett and anybody else. I think Levis would have been in contention for 4. And I think he still would be in contention for 4. I don't think he would be in contention. I mean, the Raiders like that Jamarcus Russell type quarterback, or they have in the past. So I guess he would be in contention there. But I really think the Raiders aren't going in that direction. I don't think Tennessee is. There could have been a slide past Indy, but I do believe Indy is still in the quarterback market.
Right. But if I'm Houston, I'm sticking with Davis Mills, who's good enough for now. And I could build around him until the next guy is available that I think is there for the long haul. In my mind, more certain than Will Levis is a project and maybe this and maybe that. Not second overall, baby. It's not happening in my life.
The thing that I think you might see happen because it's Houston is they take Tyree Wilson early with the second pick, and then they trade up from 12 to get either Levis or Stroud if one of them drops. Trading draft capital. That way they have their quarterback and their edge rusher, and the second round pick might not have that same bust component because edge rushers, offensive linemen, they have a higher hit rate in terms of the high first round than quarterbacks. So I could see them going that way. Personally, I'd rather use 2 and 12 for immediate starters for 5 to 10 years and take my quarterback next year.
Yeah. One more thing on the quarterbacks. What about Bryce Young's intangibles? I mean, this guy apparently is just like, he's got so many positives going on for him that it's like you gotta take this guy, right?
Yeah, and I think Carolina, while they don't usually kill the draft. Uh, they they've coached well defensively, and you hope that continues because they put a really good, with all the problems they had at quarterback last year. They were sniffing the playoffs, even after the Matt Rule firing. They could have folded up the tent, but they started winning defensive-minded games. They played not to lose at quarterback, and it worked because they have a pretty sound defense. If they could beef up the offensive line and tight end, they could be a factor in a division that's pretty much average.
Yep. Strength and running back. Let's go right there. You got the one standout in Texas, and then some really good ones. But the Longhorn guy is somebody's going to get a gem.
Yeah, we've seen a shift in the odds in the last 24 hours that bettors certainly are aware of. Whereas over 1.5 running backs was plus 350 in a lot of markets, even higher in some other markets about a week and a half ago. Then it dropped to about plus 200. It's now minus money.
Wow.
Because Gibbs of Alabama, by way of Georgia Tech, has the two things that I love: yards per carry and the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. And those kinds of things, plus enough speed to turn the corner if necessary, warrant a late first round selection. So I'm thrilled at the value in terms of the running backs going over 1.5. But if you get past him, then you wait, because there are going to be remember Houston drafted Pierce in the 4th or 5th round, and he's their starting running back. You get those all the time.
Oh yeah, that's common.
There's 10 to 12 running backs that will either be starters, 75% of the carries, or starters in a rotational tandem running back system that a lot of teams like to use, where they're going to get 40 to 50% of the carries, and they're going to come cheaply, and it's going to work.
Stay on offense, the tight ends. You just say this is as strong as maybe ever, right, for tight ends this year?
Yeah, this is 7 of the top 100 on my board are tight ends. You've got 2 tight ends that are certainly worthy of first-round picks. People are going back to the tape and realizing that Michael Mayer is probably the guy who should come off first. Dalton Kincaid fits some system. They're 2 completely different tight ends. So like with a lot of other positions, we'll get to wide receiver, it's what you value in your system and your scheme. If you like one particular scheme, maybe like the Chargers, you go for Kincaid. If you like a different system, then you go for Mayer of Notre Dame. So it just depends on that. If you like athleticism up the wazoo, then you go with Washington with Georgia, who just put up amazing numbers similar to Vernon Davis of years past. If you want bloodlines and somebody who caught 11 passes before he was out for the year, you go with Luke Musgrave from the Oregon State University, because he is a sleeper first round pick in a way. You can get 7-1, even higher on him going in the first round. And there are some teams, Cincinnati for one, where he would be a natural fit. And then there's some small school guys, South Dakota State and Old Dominion, or you can go to tight end U, Iowa, where Laporta is there, and they've had George Kittle and others over the years. Those are the 7 that stand out to me, and tight end correlates to win success. So go get one of those 7.
You think New England and Green Bay are paying attention to this right now?
Well, Green Bay better. I don't know if they go to 15, but if I'm Green Bay, I go offensive line or defensive line at 15, and then I got all this draft capital that was just made even more.
You better take a guy now.
And you trade up from 41 or 42, you take a 2nd and a 4th, and you move up to the end of the first round pick, and you take a tight end. Simple.
Yep. Defense, edge rusher, and quarterback, 2 strengths this year's draft.
Absolutely. There's a number of productive edge rushers in this draft. I really like it. Now, Will Anderson, It's funny. I came off a podcast where I say, Will Anderson, I'm probably going to lose this draft bet. I have him going to Arizona. It doesn't look good in terms of that. Got tons of value with that play. Went in with partnership on that one. And to go in the first 3.5 picks seemed automatic. But people don't like safe picks anymore. People like to reach for the stars. If Arizona trades out and if Houston makes good on its deal to take a quarterback or edge rusher, Tyree Wilson, who also has a ton of talent, then Will Anderson drops, and he's a safe pick.
Yeah, and what about more corners though? That I think was it safety last year was
safety was good.
It was good, but now it's awful this year.
Yeah, one of my top 60 players is a safety, so that's a problem.
Yes.
So you are going to have cornerbacks that aren't quite as fast, stopwatch fast, or maybe you're better off taking a cornerback and moving them to safety. It depends on whether or not they're smooth in transition. I have all that data. I got paperwork galore on which cornerbacks are fluid in terms of their hip tightness or not, lack of hip tightness. We have the 40 times, which are so important if you're going to do press man corner. Otherwise, you're a zone cornerback. So it's person team fit. If you're going to play a lot of zone, you could get by with a little bit slower cornerback who has that instinctiveness, that anticipation. If you're going to play man, you're going to need faster people, and you're going to move these cornerbacks. The best safeties from this year's draft are going to be cornerbacks.
Wow. Yeah, and let's go to the weaknesses, because wide receiver, if you needed one, you had your chance the last couple of years, and now it's a little more slim pickings out there.
Yeah, and there's going to be receivers that hit in this draft. They may not become, your Jamar Chases of the world or your Justin Jeffersons or anything like that. But receivers, there's a ton of them out there in the ranks right now, but a lot of them are not quite ready. This is not a deep class. It's a class that if you took the top 5 receivers in this class and you merged them with the 2022 class, I don't think any one of them would have gone in the top 5, and maybe not in the top 7 of last year's draft. It would not be an overlay. It would be this group and then the group after that, because you've got an Ohio State guy. In terms of size, Quentin Johnson has the best size. So if you're looking for size, which is very important to a lot of teams, you want to match a smaller guy with a larger guy. You want to have that. Let's go old school, that Warren Wells to the Fred Biletnikoff kind of thing.
Oh, that's really old school.
Where you play one off the other, because that's what works the best in terms of, finding a partner for Justin Jefferson to free things up. Finding a partner for Jamar Chase that works with T. Higgins and stuff like that. So you want that balance. So you're looking at Quentin Johnson, but he's not refined. He has some drops on tape. And what bothers me is that he caught one pass for 3 yards against Georgia in a game that they were behind right after the coin flip. I think they were behind. It was that bad. And you knew they had to throw, and he still caught one pass for 3 yards. That means he's got a learning curve up there. And that's the kind of player that we're dealing with in the first round.
Right. Now, we already mentioned the O-line is not as deep as it was last year, but specifically at guard, which is the need of too many teams.
It's the same story as cornerback to safety, and it's not necessarily a trendy thought, but it's one I believe in. The best guards in this draft are going to be converted tackles. The Northwestern guard, Skoronski, I believe is his name. He can play guard or tackle. He can start at tackle for 20 teams in the NFL, but he will be an all-pro at guard for 32 teams in the NFL. So I would draft him to be a guard, but if you have injuries, don't worry. You could plug him in at tackle. Him and Paris Johnson are the top 2, but I also like 3 or 4 others that could sneak into the first round. And there's a couple of small college guys, again, that can give you center guard versatility. And we know teams like New England, for one, they value versatility, position versatility. Seattle's another. So they're going to be looking for guys that can play two positions. And in case of injuries in a grueling 17-game season, I think that's a real perk to have a player that can play two positions.
Yeah, but how many of those guys will be available? And there's only a couple of guys on your list. And let's just say even late first round, will they be gone by then?
Okay, so late first round, at least the top four will be gone. The top four could be gone by pick 17, 18,
Okay,
19 at the latest.
If you're the Rams, if you're the Bengals, of course, they don't have those picks. But if you are, those are the guys they need, like now.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're the Rams, well, the Rams are they have a second round pick, so that's nice for them finally. And the Bengals are going to have to let the draft come to them. Will they take a running back? Will they take a tight end? I wish they still had the draft props. They stopped this about a year or two ago. Will a team draft offense or defense?
Oh, yes, that's true.
And I love those because to me, I could hone in much faster on exactly will be offense or defense. Sometimes, like last year, when there were more safeties available, you couldn't always get cornerback versus safety, that kind of combination, or edge rusher versus pure linebacker, even somebody who would be termed a linebacker, but they're really an edge rusher, offense or defense. And I think so Cincinnati is going to be one of those teams that they're probably going to go offense, but we don't know which position depending on who's there. There's a couple of long shot centers that I think could sneak into the first round. But if not, I think that's where you're going to see a run on some of these guys who just missed the first round. And offensive line is going to be a prime position for people who just missed the first round to see some offensive linemen coming off early on day 2.
So it sounds like you're talking about maybe 5 or 6 O linemen gone in the top 35-ish.
Yeah, I think there'll be even more, maybe because of the position, because wide receiver may drop and we'd have less than we expect. And of course, safety is non-existent. I think we'll be 7 or 8 in the top 35 or so. It could be that much at offensive line, depending on need. If you don't need an offensive line, defensive line, if you don't need the edge rusher, you're going to look offensive line or vice versa.
Okay. And the other thing, we already talked about safety and the lack of, and linebacker too. That's disappointing. Not a great linebacker class this draft.
Pure linebackers, none in the first round. There's 3 people that look like they'll come off between, let's say, 35 and 45-ish or so, like that. It's going to be interesting. I've heard varying opinions on all 3. I have one of the 3 as a play for me. I'm not too thrilled about it, but I have value. Sometimes you have value, but you still don't like the play.
Right.
It may not happen. But it'll be interesting to see because the people I'm talking about, one is a little slower, but he's from Iowa. And that means he's well trained. Any Iowa defensive player that comes out in the draft or any Iowa tight end, they've been well trained. They've been well skilled, but they may not be as athletic as somebody coming from Arkansas or Alabama like Drew Sanders is. Problem with Drew Sanders is he has 1-year body of work, so it's a projection. But he has the athleticism. He has first-round athleticism. Let's put it that way.
You want to talk anything more about specific positions at all before we go to value in the props? Because there's good and bad right now, according to your own plays early on.
Yeah. No, let's go into the props.
Okay.
The strategy that I've used is always been looking for value early, looking for those plus. I got CJ Stroud, for instance. Everybody could have got CJ Stroud at plus 5 to 1 or more early. Looked like a good deal at the time. Obviously, it's not even close to a good deal now. But then I pivoted when Bryce Young, he was as high as plus 250, which I did not get, but I got plus 210 on that. So it's really about timing. When Michael Mayer became a dog at plus 160 in terms of where his draft slot would be, I thought, well, wait a second. It seems 50-50 to me because Dalton Kincaid, if you study the draft like I have, you say, okay, they're going to go back to the tape at some point, and Michael Mayer has that. Dalton Kincaid did not work out. He was not medically cleared to work out. So because of that, I thought plus 160 was value, and now he's the favorite. Do I really know who's going to go first? No, I think it's a coin flip. But a coin flip and you have plus 160, that's pretty good. If you win half your coin flips, that's a return on investment.
Exactly.
So you go from there. What stands out now is there's been a flip. Who's going to go first cornerback? Christian Gonzalez, who was the favorite up until last week, or Weatherspoon, who put in that blazing pro day and solidified himself as the first pick at almost minus 200. I don't think that's great value at minus 200 personally. I haven't pulled the trigger, and I possibly won't because I'm more interested in two other cornerbacks and their draft slot. But it wouldn't surprise me if it turns out that some team values Gonzalez more than Witherspoon. Same with offensive line. It's really timing. You could have got Skorensky at plus money. You could have gotten Paris Johnson at plus money. At the time, a long time ago, it was probably a 50-50 thing, and it's still a 50-50 thing. I jumped the gun on that, and I don't have a great deal. I have minus 130 on Paris Johnson, and I think it's properly priced now. I think I'm as possible to lose it as I am to win it. So I wouldn't have made the play now. But sometimes you just have to do it because it could. The betting market changes on information. It doesn't change on metrics like a game in the NFL.
Right.
Somebody puts out a tweet and the market will change drastically. Somebody releases a test score or a pro day workout or whatever the case may be, an S2 score, and the market changes. It's an information-driven draft, and that's why the markets, there were very few choices. Vegas didn't come out with very many until a few days ago. A lot of offshores had draft props, and then they pulled them, and then they brought them back. So these things are changing, and by rule, Vegas takes the draft props off the board 24 hours before kickoff. So late information won't be too valuable for a lot of people.
Right. Now, it's time to brag about your last year or so of draft plays. You have a great record, but you go from that to the one or two where you made early plays this year, and the value is just value doesn't exist. It went the wrong way.
Yeah. So in preparation, I kind of look back because I look like every week, how are these going? How are these going? About a week ago, I was saying, oh my goodness, I have some plays that I hate now. What did I do? I went under 4.5 quarterbacks, for example, and I gave minus 230, which I thought was a good deal. I mean, the year before, I gave minus 150 at under 5.5 quarterbacks, and only one came in. I thought this was a good thing. Now, over 4.5 quarterbacks is favored.
Wow.
So because, they think the Tennessee quarterback is going, and I can't argue with that right now. There's a lot of steam there. So not only am I probably going to lose the play, but I'm going to lose it at minus 230. So not proud of that. But in looking today at new information, I probably have like 3 out of every 4 plays represent good value. Now, representing good value and having 4-1, in some cases 7-1, doesn't mean you're going to win the play. But I'm still relatively happy with more of my plays. But that's one, for example, that I just misjudged the market. I made the play last October, by the way. So it's not, I always feel like quarterbacks are too hyped, just like we may see Stroud drop. For a while, we may see Levis drop. Last year, we saw the bottom drop off on all these quarterbacks. I just thought, okay, I'm going to do it because, it just doesn't work out that way. There could be injuries. There could be other, they could poke and prod and find these things out. It's incredibly rare to have 5 quarterbacks drafted in the first round. It's 2 or 3 times in the history.
But you have proven that you invented the word gamble, because the earlier you make a play, the bigger gamble it is for so many factors, because you have no idea what's going to happen a year later or several months later.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting because for a lot of people, for 90% of the people, I'd say don't make plays as even a month out. For me, I think I have an advantage because I've studied the draft for 40 years.
And your
So I
record
know
last
these
year
players.
again was in props?
Probably 70%, but I don't think that's bragging, because anybody who does this, you talk to the people who are out there, 70% would be their floor. The people who do this, once
You're
a
talking
year
draft,
and
just draft
just
only.
draft. Yeah, I mean, I've had years where I've been 85. I mean, we had years where we hit 5-to-1 shots and we maxed it out.
Yeah.
I've told those stories on air of the Cincinnati guy where he was 7-to-1, he was bet down to 5-to-2. We punched the ticket every, he had to rebet all the time, and there he was betting, for Cincinnati. You can win one of those at
Yeah.
max play, and it can make your day. We had tremendous amount, but now the draft has become something that sharp people get into more, and it's an information driven thing. It's harder to hit 80%. This year, again, let's go back to the new GMs and the new coaches. This is going to be a hard year. I don't promise to hit even 60%. I just hope to hit some of the longer shots that I got value on.
Well, you get more than 60% if you could dump a couple of those bad value plays and get them out
Yeah.
of the market.
Yeah, there are a couple, and I took a stab. I took a stab, for example, at 5-to-1. I think it wasn't even a good deal that Dallas would draft a running back with their first pick. Now they still might. Gibbs would be in play, but at the time with Bijan Robinson and not knowing where he was going, I thought he was in play. But thinking of it later on, Dallas is pretty passive on draft day. You hear them talk a big game, but they don't trade up in the draft.
Right.
And Bijan's not going to be there when Dallas picks. So I think that was faulty reasoning on my part, for example.
But isn't this the perfect example where Dallas might trade up to get him because of the locality of it? A Texas guy. I believe he's a Cowboys fan, I think.
I think they'll be beaten to the punch.
Okay.
I think they'll be beaten to the punch. I think it's just too easy for them to, to end up being second. Philadelphia, for example, they moved up ahead of them to take the player they wanted 2 or 3 years ago. Philadelphia moved up to take, watch Philadelphia in the draft, for example, because when they move up, it means somebody is getting screwed over. Like Baltimore had Davis, the defensive tackle Davis, on their radar screen at pick, I don't know what it was, 14 last year, and Philly moved right ahead of him to take him.
Okay. Let's talk about individual players. Lamar Jackson, we'll start with him. If they trade him to who and how that will affect the draft, I know you got thoughts on that.
Well, personally, if the organization wasn't the most screwed up organization in the history of sports, if I'm Washington, I'm trading my number 1 and number 2 pick. Number 1 pick this year, and my number 1, I'm doing that poison pen deal that you could do. I sign Lamar Jackson to an offer sheet. I give him an 80% guaranteed contract. Nobody else has more than 60% except for
not the Deshaun Watson money guarantee, because that's ridiculous.
I would. I mean,
Washington,
because Washington needs to make an on-field splash.
I know, but I think it's just ridiculous money.
I would trade 2 draft picks. Washington's not that far away. They have a decent coach. They have one of the best top 3 front sevens in the NFL. Their wide receiver core is better than people think. Their offensive line is decent. Running back is a devalued position anyway. They just need a tight end and a secondary person. If they took 2 draft picks, one this year and one the next year, sign Lamar Jackson to a $250 million 5-year contract, $200 million guaranteed, I would do it.
Okay. My only issue is Ron Rivera really the right guy for him? Because you want to get an offensive guy who's going to allow him to do his thing. And I'm not so sure it's a great fit, but you know what I'm saying?
He was there with Cam Newton.
Yeah, so?
Well, Lamar Jackson is better than Cam Newton.
I can't remember who the OC was at the time, so I have to look back on that one.
Yeah, I mean, he does defer to the OC.
Right.
So that's a big point. Ron Rivera would be more hands. I think he would be fine. I think it would be a shot in the arm to the organization in more ways than one. But ultimately, we're going to find out that Lamar Jackson is going to hold out to the last minute.
Yeah.
And it's a stubborn, it's just kind of me against the world, and we'll see.
Well, I've said all along, it's just stupid he doesn't have an agent, and he doesn't get it because there's 1,000 negatives to do what he does, and he's going to take stuff personally that's told to him that he would never know or would be softened by an agent and all that, besides the fact that he's not an agent from a negotiation standpoint. That's a professional guy who does what he's supposed to do. It's hard to do this, and so he's just doing it the wrong way. It's disappointing because I like him a lot. What about some of the players to look for in this in the potential that will affect the draft and make draft picks go from one team to another, like Cook, like Eckler, like Kamara, like Fournette, guys like that?
Yeah, Cook, for some reason is on the trading block, and this is a situation where all these guys are running backs, and I think it's fascinating, and I think it's something to watch on the first and second day of the draft because there's so many running backs that you could pick up. If the person that a team, let's Minnesota, if they have their eyes fixed on one particular running back, maybe it's Charbonnet of UCLA, maybe it's another guy. A guy from Pitt that I really like. Now, whoever it is, if that guy's available, they could have a contingent trade in the works that involves Delvin Cook. And I think Eckler could be the same way, although I do expect Eckler to stay and play it out. Cook wants to stay as well, but I think you look for some of these teams. Joe Mixon, I think he'll be cut in a second if Cincinnati drafts a running back.
Yep.
So you look at those kinds of things. It's not going to be a trade for Joe Mixon, but I really think Cincinnati, it would be wise to be in the running back market because Mixon is slowing down. The yards per carry is that first indicator of when somebody slows down. He's not getting mileage out of his pass receptions. You're talking 6 yards a reception. That's not good enough in the NFL. That's negative variance. That's Ezekiel Elliott, another person's negative variance. You can't use Ezekiel Elliott and Joe Mixon in the pass game. Not that they can't catch passes, but they don't move the chains.
Yeah. I have a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who, when he came out of college, I thought he had the best chance to be the next elite superstar, and he's been not even close. Now, he hasn't had great guys throwing to him either, so I don't know how much of that's the equation or if he's just not as good as I thought he was.
This is the year we'll find out because he has an offensive-minded coach in Sean Payton who's going to dial up schemes that Denver hasn't seen in years, having gone through some defensive-minded coaches or some mistakes at the coaching range.
But do you trade him?
I don't trade him for a second. Denver has listened, but I think they would have to be overwhelmed with an offer. I'd say there's a 90% chance he stays, and there's at least a 50% chance that he thrives in 2023.
And fascinating, the young and the old quarterbacks that are sort of in the juggling. Where are they going to be this year? And Trey Lance is really at the top of that list in my mind. It's like, okay, so are the Niners going to dump him for some kind of a decent draft pick here? And who's going to get him? And for what reason? Is he ready to play as a starter?
Yeah. He's going to be cleared medically for week 1, and he needs to stay on San Francisco. San Francisco has high hopes. You've got a 7th-round draft pick. As well as he played, it's a 5-game sample size, and that's it. So maybe 5, 7, 8-game sample size, but you have to have more than one quarterback in this day and age. Sam Darnold may or may not thrive with finally having an offensive line and tight end and a coach that schemes well. But at least at the beginning of the year, you're not going to get fair market trade value for Trey Lance. I think instead, look at a Ryan Tannehill. If Tennessee does make some really crazy moves in this draft, he may be a post-June 1st designated cut, or maybe they work out a deal with a team that didn't get a trade and, a quarterback. And it's kind of like the Raiders took Jimmy G and they signed him, and Derek Carr is in New Orleans. Tannehill is that same kind of mold, where maybe a team that comes up short at quarterback and says, no, we don't want to develop somebody way down the totem pole in this draft. And now Tannehill's available. Let's talk to Tennessee. They got a quarterback. That would be more interesting to me.
Yeah. I'm watching this in the back of my mind. I can see Cardo Olave is going to be a really nice combination this year.
Yeah, Olave is smooth. One more guy I want to mention before we move on,
Yeah.
and that would be Budda Baker, because you're
Yeah.
looking at an Arizona team that might have, when all is said and done, one of the worst, if not the worst, rosters in the NFL when it comes up. If Hopkins gets traded, which I think there's going to be a better than 50% chance, we highlighted that early,
Yep.
in terms of the Jets and so on. And if Budda Baker, who's so outspoken right now about I don't want to be here, if he gets traded, and possibly for pennies on the dollar, maybe a third round pick or something like that, some team has a chance to to get a guy in the back end of the defense. That's another name that I would look at on day 1 or 2 of the draft. We saw AJ Brown traded last year. We may have 2 or 3 of those, and they come out of the blue. Maybe somebody we don't even we haven't even mentioned.
Right. And we haven't mentioned Derrick Henry, and I find it hard to believe that rumor is true, but I mean, who knows what the truth is, but I can't imagine them trading him.
I can see him being there one more year and one more year only.
Right.
They run it back with Tannehill. They run it back with Henry. They still
literally run it back. Yes.
Yeah. They still feel like they're in contention, which they might be, in that division. But in the overall scheme of the AFC, they're further away from contention than I think people realize.
Yeah. How about the teams we want to cover here as far as the over under stuff for this season? In the trade in the draft situation, Tennessee, the Chargers, Detroit, how do they fit here?
Yeah, these are the teams I'm most curious about. If Tennessee does go on a trade mart and they get suddenly very young, this is a team you want to fade before everybody else jumps on the negative bandwagon there.
Right.
If the Chargers, who really, I'm telling the wrong person this because you're not in the Brandon Staley fan club yet.
No. Yet?
And I don't think you're ever going to be in there.
I doubt it.
But they're closer to overtaking Kansas City than people realize.
But we've been saying that for 3 years.
Well, they fixed their special teams last year, and if that continues,
yeah.
Yeah,
and they still aren't going anywhere. They got the deepest. We said before last season they might have the deepest roster in the league. Before last season, okay. So what are they doing?
This is a team that lets the draft come to them. Them in Baltimore, they just wait patiently, and then hey, Derwin James is available. Let's take him.
Right.
And there's numerous examples. They got their offensive tackle that way. They've got another offensive tackle, back-to-back offensive tackles that way. Who's ever going to be there when they draft? Is probably going to be somebody you say, wow, I can't believe he got to the Chargers. That's a team that I'm going to be interested to see what they do on draft day. The Lions we talked about this. Now, Detroit, it's all spec because they have yet to win a playoff game, much less get in the playoffs in a long, long time. But with 5 of the first 85 picks, and I don't think they're going to stay there. I think you're going to see 5 become 3 even. I think the Lions are going to be trigger happy. The question is, what 3 players are they going to take? And that's going to fascinate me.
Right. And Minnesota, we don't even know what the hell they're doing. I mean, they're sort of like this. They're up and down, and very disappointing season last year. They need to improve quickly.
Yeah, this is a dangerous time for them. They probably have Kirk Cousins for 1 more year. They tend to have drafts where they get a lot of depth, but other than Justin Jefferson, they kind of trade backwards, up and down, sideways, and so on. There's some speculation that they may actually use their draft capital to get their quarterback of the future, whether it be moving up for Hawker in the first round, whether it be to move up in case Stroud really falls or Richardson, somebody that they want to be 1 year ahead of the curve in terms of planning for life after Kirk Cousins. So I understand that philosophy. The question is, what quarterback is it going to be? Are they going to be able to develop them? And how much draft capital are they going to give up? But Minnesota they will be a team to watch on draft weekend.
And they're also one of the teams that's thought maybe interested in somehow acquiring Trey Lance, if that's even possible.
Yeah, they're going to put their toes in the water and inquire about quarterbacks. I don't think it's a smokescreen to say that they'd like to plan 1 year in advance
Right.
to, to have more of a smooth transition away from Cousins.
Okay, so last minute thoughts on draft plays that maybe we didn't cover so much, that either specific plays or ideas of what to do as we wind down to, hey, there's still time to make some prop plays here.
Well, one of the things I'm going to be doing in the next 24 to 48 hours is really mapping out exactly where I think each team is going to look. If this happens, then this happens, just
Right.
kind of contingency plans. And when I map that out and probably send it out, so if you follow me on Twitter, you're going to find it somewhere.
Twitter, where? What's your Twitter? Your Twitter?
Somewhere it says Ron A
Okay, I'm
Sports.
just double checking.
Yeah. So you might find an article or two coming out that talks about this kind of thing. And what I'm going to be trying to do is come up with plus value plays at this point. Where they might go if their preferred choice is off the board, where they might trade up, or which teams are most likely to trade up and trade down and stuff like
Right.
that. What player might slide because of what I'm hearing, and so on and so forth. What's the buzz? Where the first book that moves a particular prop, why are they moving? And can I get in on that if I believe that to be a credible thing? So I'm going to be doing some scooping, or some investigating and snooping around in terms of that. I'm real curious. For example, the positions I'm going to be looking at, Ted, would be cornerback. I'm curious of the dynamic between Joey Porter Jr. and Banks of Maryland as to where they may go and how that flushes out with the safety that's being mentioned, because somebody may go safety instead of cornerback. There's three guys that kind of fit into the 15 to 25 range. And if I can make heads or heels as to where they're going to go, I might pull the trigger on an over-under number there. And then if you see late buzz on a player, there are props available saying, will they go in the first round? I haven't seen as many yes, no. Again, books are being really cautious. It's either are they going plus this, minus this, and so on. It's not a no. I wish there was a yes, no, a forced choice. But unfortunately, this kind of stuff is drying up a little. So
Right.
I'm just going to be looking to take a stab here and there. And the positions I'm looking at are primarily offensive line and cornerback, where there's choices available.
One of my favorite things about your reports after the draft is how you rate the teams and your little comments about the GMs and whether they did bad, good, or whatever, that kind of stuff. So do you have a thought, one or two that you think in advance are going to have a fantastic draft, and a couple that you're just going to say, I don't expect, I think they're going to blow it again?
Yeah, that's great, Ted. I'm
That's
smiling as we do it.
that's a hard one, but sometimes it's not that hard, right?
Can we do the easy one first, other than Houston?
Okay.
And I know there's people that are going to listen or watch to this that are prideful of the Atlanta Falcons. But if they don't draft an edge rusher with pick number 8, I'm just going to shake my head. I don't care if the second coming of Joe Burrow is available, or Will Anderson. I guess, well, if Will Anderson drops to 8, it fits the edge rusher, so that works. But I'm telling you, you cannot live on 39 sacks in 34 games when the average in 1 year is 40 or 40 and a half. I mean, if you don't get to the quarterback, you put an unnecessary strain on your defense. So I expect Atlanta to make mistakes, and I expect to have some fun with them again. I was so surprised last year with the Jets, with the Giants, with Seattle having a conventional draft, that you don't really know where it's coming from.
Can they do it again, right?
Yeah. So it's really going to be interesting to see. I'm trying to pull a team off the top of my head that might surprise me. I wonder if the Raiders could surprise me. I wonder if they could go to
Well, if they do
fundamentally
even
sound.
average, that's surprising.
Yeah. I'm just, am I off the wall by saying the Raiders could be someone that I come back and say, Ted, you know something? It wasn't that bad.
That's not exactly the way I want to buy your car, though. If you say,
yeah,
my car's not that bad, will you give me two extra $1,000?
Yeah, he's a pretty good
Yeah,
surgeon, but
exactly.
yeah.
For you,
We don't want
not
to.
for me.
Yeah. We don't want to get quite into that, but yeah, I'm interested because they have 11 picks or so. Whether or not they could really pull this off, it's just that's really an out of the blue one.
Yeah.
So let's see
No,
where that goes.
that fascinates me because I mean that's your specialty. By Sunday, you're already writing stuff like rating the
Yeah.
hell out of these guys.
Yeah, I'll have first round knee jerk reactions, and sometimes I soften them later. But I'll have something coming out. That's the day I stayed up the latest in my entire life. I'll be up till 2 a.m. writing a
Oh,
report on
thanks.
my first round impressions. But it's really a fun day of the year to really go through. And 2 years ago, teams made unbelievable mistakes. Last year was very, very hard to make a mistake. This year, we're going to be back to some unpredictability. If this draft turns out to be, oh, that's kind of the way the first round went, that would surprise me and it would sadden me.
Yeah. Well, bottom line is that besides this particular show, the draft is always the best reality TV show.
Well,
You know,
I hope people got a lot out of this and got some thoughts. And I think it's just going to be a fascinating draft. You and I, Las Vegas Chris, he's not so much on the draft, but he'll give you a full critique of the Detroit Lions draft next week. We'll have him on.
I thought he
We'll
was
try
the
to have a
Detroit
recap.
Lions GM. Isn't he the new guy that they don't talk about? Behind
He's
the scenes guy?
busy right now. He's collecting money from the Detroit Lions, who place bets from the front office and from the teams.
Oh.
All the gambling suspensions and stuff
So
like
it
that.
wasn't through him, then, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, he denies everything. It's not through him, but
I don't believe it.
but he's got to go there and settle some accounts with the Detroit Lions people who aren't going to be allowed to bet in the facility anymore.
Yeah,
but I trust he's going to have some opinions on the draft. And what's neat about it next week is we get to talk about how this correlates to divisional odds and to season win odds, because we won't have the schedule piece yet, but we can start painting a picture. We've got free agency. By next week, we'll have the draft, and then we're going to have the later piece of the schedule. We're going to start to piece this together, and we're going to start giving some opinions about where these teams might go in terms of bettable options.
By the way, I would love to do a seance next week. Okay. We'll have you and Chris, and we bring back the late, great Alex Karras to talk about what he thinks of the Detroit guys gambling. If anybody remembers his issue from decades ago.
If we can't have Paul Hornung join him, forget it.
Well, yeah, but Alex was a Lion, though, so that's perfect, right? What can I say? And by the way, it's disappointing to me. I cannot follow the draft closely this year because I got back-to-back hockey broadcasts to do on Friday night and Saturday night, and I'll be writing pregame shows. SportsUSA, if you're into hockey, we're doing the Minnesota-Dallas game on Friday and Kings and Oilers game on Saturday night. That'll be game 6 after the Kings had their reverse miracle on Manchester last night and blew a 3-0 lead and lost. That was a really bad one. But so anyway, it's going to be a great draft. And Mr. Rogers, you see him right there. I wish you good luck with the Jets, sir.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this one up. Thanks, Ted. And thanks to everybody who spent an hour plus with us talking draft. We could go on for hours and hours, but then we really lose viewerships. You know where to find Ted, SportsUSA, and you can find him doing hockey. And pretty soon we'll be back in the football swing again. You can find me. I'm very busy this time of year before I move completely off of the NFL for a little bit. But right now is an exciting time. So thanks again, and check us out down the road and enjoy the draft.
Good luck with the draft, everybody.